Hello and welcome to the Blessings in the Streets podcast. I am your host, Joseph B. Roberts, and in studio with me today is a phenomenal woman that I've had the pleasure of meeting probably about a year ago. We have a mutual mentor. Shout out to Dr. G, Kristen Guillory. And, I reached out to her, of course, to see about having her as a guest on my show, and she graciously agreed despite her very, very busy schedule that she's tied up in right now, doing some great and magnificent things. This woman is a clinical psychologist. She's a speaker. She's a wife, but most importantly, she's a woman of God. And again, she's taking time out of her busy schedule to share a little bit about her journey, her story, with the hopes of uplifting, encouraging, and inspiring others, especially in the areas of what it means to face the challenges of adversity and just how to properly deal with that and overcome it without it being something that overwhelms you in the process. So it is my privilege and honor, ladies and gentlemen. I'm super excited to have her on board. So at this time, I'd like to introduce to you Miss Christi Culpepper. Christi, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So before we jump into our segments for today, I do want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about yourself. If you would, who you are, where you're from, what you do, kind of give our audience a taste of who is Christi Culpepper.
Absolutely. So, hey, everybody out there that will be listening to this podcast, I am Christi Culpepper, also Christi Culpepper-Walker. I like to put a hyphenated name in there. I am a clinical psychologist. I am a wife. I'm a sister. I'm an ambassador for Christ. I am a speaker. I am a lot of things, right? I am originally from Fairfield, Alabama, right outside of Birmingham. So most people have heard of Birmingham. Not everybody's heard of Fairfield. And I am Southern through and through. I am currently in the DMV area now, and I enjoy just living life, y'all, and living life freely. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more today.
Awesome. And again, so glad to have you and so glad that you were gracious enough to accept the invite and squeeze me into your very, very busy schedule because I know you got a lot on your plate right now. So I'm super excited. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So, Christi, when we talk about our journeys, when we talk about our stories, again, I'm a firm believer in the fact that in order to truly capture the essence, to truly capture the substance of where our stories how they've transpired over time, it's very important that we take a moment to reflect back on the beginnings as to where it all starts. And so that's exactly what we're going to do right now. So if you would take us back to growing up in Alabama as a child, as you reflect back on that, if you would kind of share with us, what was it like for you growing up? Fond memories that you have about it, as well as if there was any challenges that come to mind along the way that you care to share, feel free to share that as well. It kind of gives us a foundational basis of where your story begins.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, one, let me say, being able to share your story and being able to hear other people's stories is so important. It's so important. Our mentor, Dr. G, often says data changes minds, but stories change hearts. Right. And it's a reason for that because people can connect with you differently when they're able to hear your story. Right. And so I talk about stories often. I talk about my story often. And I have very fond memories growing up. My family's very close knit. So, immediate family and extended family lived within a certain mile radius of each other. And so I saw, grandmom and aunts and uncles and a lot of family every day for the most part. And my mom was a school teacher. My dad worked as a conductor for a railroad. And so there was a lot of time spent with family. We had a lot of entrepreneurs in the family. My grandmother actually ran a cafe. And so all of the family, after they worked their main job, they would come and work in my grandmother's cafe at night. Right. So I did my homework in the cafe. I slept in a booth in the cafe a lot of the times. Right. And so it was just a lot of memories of just good times. Right. My family did a lot of, what I would consider to be like mission type work in our community. So a lot of nonprofit work, a lot of going out and doing things like feeding the homeless and, doing clothing drives, did a lot of work in the church, spent a lot of time in the church. And so, the things that you would think about with someone growing up in a Christian Black household, right? Those are a lot of my experiences growing up. Yeah.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Always love to hear, stories like that about the beginnings, especially with the big families. And, of course, I didn't grow up in the South, but, I've always, people that I've had an opportunity to meet that grew up in the South, a lot of times they talk about that and, that community and how much, how important it is in terms of the just the nurturing and the love that's shown and just the things that you learn. I mean, you spoke about one thing that just jumped out at me right away was when you said, entrepreneurship was a thing amongst your family, and so it's no surprise to me when I think about what you're doing right now and the works that you do is almost a natural fit because that's
Yeah.
what you know. And,
Yeah.
and it's especially, exciting to hear and see these type of things, and we call it bias or not, but, a lot of times you might, there might be those who don't, make assumptions that, people of our background and heritage, don't aspire to be entrepreneurs, that we don't have those backgrounds and those experiences, that we didn't grow up in that. I mean, I've had conversations before with friends of mine that when I think about growing up in Chicago, even, how there used to be, a street that was like literally a couple of blocks away from us that had all of these rows of businesses. And it was, it's amazing when I think back, I didn't understand it at the time, but how many of those were Black owned businesses and of all different types and shapes,
Right.
whether it was the shoe man or the grocery store or the restaurant owner or the whatever. I mean, it was just a multitude of things. And so to see that, and then of course my mom had, an entrepreneurial time frame in her life, so I understand what you talk about, like getting out of school and then going to in this case, going to her office and sitting there doing homework and helping out around there, just kind of getting exposure, kind of getting a taste of that. I think is so critical. So it's always wonderful to hear that kind of, those type of stories, and it just kind of puts a smile on your face. But again, it also puts some perspective as to, and I'm sure you probably have had moments where you've reflected on that yourself and saying like, how did I get here? Because you don't just wake up one morning and
Right.
decide. A true entrepreneur, I've always believed that a true entrepreneur, to have that vision be placed upon you, that's to me, that's a divine intervention. You don't, there are people, anybody can open up a business. I can come up with a name, slap it on the wall and say I'm in business. But when you're an entrepreneur, there's a vision that comes with that. And I believe it's a divine vision. It's
Absolutely.
something that's bigger than you. And it's going to require lots of work, and you're going to have to be very selective in the people that you bring in to help you build it, and
Absolutely.
most importantly, who you're doing the work for, who's watching, and how
Exactly.
those gifts that have been placed in you early on, how they're beginning to reveal themselves and be applied accordingly in the respective works that you're doing. So, yeah,
Absolutely, absolutely. I tell people, and it might not be this way for everybody, but being an entrepreneur is just like, I think a lot of times in your blood,
mm,
right? Like, like you said, you grow up, you see it, you have a different perspective because of it. And so when I think back, like my great grandmother, even though I never met her, she owned a store, she owned a
mm,
general store, right? And that was back in times when, our folks didn't own a lot of things. And so she passed that down to my grandmother and my grandmother's sisters. And so they all had some type of entrepreneurial undertaking, right? And even
mm.
my brother has kept that going, and he now has his own restaurant in the Birmingham
Awesome.
area, right? And so, you see it, and it's just like you said, it takes vision, and we have different tasks for different people, right? Like God gives us all different gifts, and I think it really takes, like you said, divine intervention to be able to do some of the things that we're doing.
Absolutely. Love that. Love that. So, Christy, again, you had a wonderful childhood. Obviously, as we venture off into our adult lives, more and
Yeah,
more experiences, more and more exposures come our way. But in the midst of those experiences and those exposures come storms,
absolutely.
and they become more frequent, more prevalent as we get older. Bottom line is you live long enough, you're going to face some challenges, some storms in life that are going to hit you, and in some instances hit you in ways that you might actually find yourself at times questioning, how am I going to get through this? I mean, you may
Absolutely.
be really good at navigating some of the day-to-day type stuff, but every now and then we get hit with that storm, an intensity level that it literally knocks us to our, brings us to our knees, so to speak.
Yeah.
And even as a believer, sometimes you you start questioning, God, I know you done did a lot for me, but how you gonna pull this one off? How am I gonna do this? Because when you don't have an opportunity to throw some money at it and make it go away, when you don't have an opportunity to pick up a phone and make a call and call in that favor to make it go away, when there's nothing that you can think of or reach out to or grab hold to make it disappear, to make this problem come up off of me, that can be overwhelming for anybody. And
Absolutely.
so that said, if you would tell us about a time when you felt like you were in that type of situation where you didn't see a way out. You were maybe fearful, worrying, anxious, all of the different feelings that come along with the stresses of being hit with a storm where you don't know how you're going to get up out of it. I'm trusting and believing that the mere fact that you're here today to talk with us, that whatever story you're about to share, it's something that you went through and you were able to ultimately come up out of. But maybe at that time you had doubts, you had fears, you had worries. So with that said, if you would share with us what that experience was like for you, and what was ultimately the turning point that you were able to sort of, again, at least at the very minimum, being able to see a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel as you were trying to come up out of that situation.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm gonna tell you about 3 times, right, that happened within 2 years of each other.
Mm.
And so, I told you about my family, told you we're really close knit. It's a lot of us. My family's pretty awesome, right? And I'm sure everybody's biased, right? But my family's pretty awesome. And so for me, the first time where I said, "Ooh, I can't fix this," and there's nobody else that can fix this either, was when my mom died.
Mm.
So I'm 25. I had finished my master's program, which was about 4 hours away from Birmingham. So I was in the Mobile, Alabama area, and I moved home. And I was about to start technically my first real job, like as a therapist, right? And I get home, and my mom had battled cancer when I was in high school, and she went into remission, and everything was great. And it came back a little bit before I started my master's program, which was a 2-year program. And so for 2 years, she kind of battled with this reemergent cancer. And I get home, I graduated, but our ceremony wasn't until that December. And so
Mm.
my program ended that July. And so I come home like the end of July or so, supposed to start my job on August 14th. And the day I started my job, my mom passed away
Mm.
while I was at work. Right. And yes, she, had been sick. She had been battling with this, but nobody was under the impression, right, that she was about to pass away. And so my brother had to come get me from work. This is a new job, my first day. He didn't know where I was. He had to find me. He burst into my meeting with my boss, right? And I'm like, "Why are you here?" And he's trying to explain, and it hit me what he was saying, and it was difficult.
Mm.
I remember it being hard to breathe. Like I couldn't actually catch my breath, right? And so at some point, I'm Baptist. I'm Southern Missionary Baptist. So you don't get upset with God, right? At least that's what I felt at the time.
Mm.
And so I'm like, okay, I'm not upset with God. I'm just not talking to God right now,
Mm.
right? Because surely he couldn't want me to do anything else on this earth if he took my mama.
Mm.
Because as far as I was concerned, right, like my mom was the person that fixed everything. And she did. She fixed a lot of things for a lot of people. And so if she wasn't there, there was no more work that he wanted me to do, right? So I was just going to bide my time on earth until it was time for me to go. And he let me pout for a little bit, right? And then, I started feeling I'm not going to say better. I got to a place where I'm like, there's still work for me to do. Right. So I was going to work every day, right? This new job, going to work every day. I took a week off, but after that, going to work every day, doing my job, I did my job well, but there was no joy, right? Because I'm like, my mom's gone. And so eventually there started to be some glimpses of joy. There started to be some happiness. I started to feel like, oh, you still have things left here to do. And so you're not just here, right, waiting for God to call you home. There's actually work for you to do. And your mom would want you to do work. Right. And so I started having those types of urges. And so that's when, because my plan had always been to be a doctor since I was 5 years old. That was the plan. And so I knew I wanted to be a psychologist. I knew I had to go to grad school. That's why I started with a master's. And I was going to come home. The plan was to come home, apply for my doctorate program. Right. But then, of course, that got derailed for a little bit. And so 2 years into being in back in Birmingham area, in the Birmingham area, I applied for my doctorate program and decided I was going to continue on. And then at the end of my first semester, my dad passed away. So that's 2 years after my mom. And then 3 months later, my grandmother passed away. And so I'm like, okay, God, what we doing? Was, like I thought we had an understanding here. What's happening? Right. And so I knew that they would have wanted me to keep going. And so I did what I thought was the healthiest thing to do. And I kept pushing. Right. And I did. I finished my doctorate, got a PhD, like all of that's great. And it was maybe a few years after that I had moved up here to the DMV area. And I went to see a acupuncturist. And she was doing an assessment because I've always had like sinus issues and like headaches and things like that. And I've always wanted to try acupuncture. So I finally got to the place where I could do it. And I'm talking to her. I hadn't even told her about the family history of how many people have died and when they died and all of that. I'm just giving her like family medical history. And she said, I hear grief in your voice. And I said, no, I dealt with that. And she was like, you sure? And the more we talked and the more I started talking and I just was boohooing. And she was like, yeah, I don't think you fully dealt with this. And it was at that point that I realized like I kept going, but I had not actually healed. Right. And I had not, even being a psychologist, I had not understood the full weight of losing three, and there were some other losses in there, right? But those were like three very significant losses in such a short amount of time.
Wow. I guess first off, appreciate you being transparent in what you shared there. It's never easy to talk about, losing parents, regardless of how long ago it's happened, whether it's the parents, whether it's even grandparents, and especially if you had a really solid, close relationship on top of that, it makes it that much more, of a challenge, if you will. But, I again, as a believer, you and I both know that even in the midst of those painful moments, God makes no mistakes. And it's like, I think one thing that we want to point out here, even going to the acupuncture that spoke to you, is saying, I hear grief in your voice. I think it's very important that we understand that it's okay to grieve. And that's, that's something we, of course, we've had that drilled in through our mentor. It's important to grieve. You have to have that moment to let it all out. And there's nothing wrong with that. That, being a believer doesn't mean that it's, a bad thing for you to grieve, like as if you've suddenly, no longer trust God or anything like that. No, you're still human. And it's okay to allow your humanity to show and to deal with whatever those emotions are, whether it's sadness, anger, frustration, or any of that, whatever that is, have that moment. So I think that's a key thing to highlight. And then I think about how you specifically spoke about your mom. And I'm sure probably your dad and your grandmother probably had a similar characteristic, but when you talked about your mom, you spoke about her and saying, she was always that one who was fixing things. She was always, whether it was her stuff or other people's stuff, she was always a fixer. And I sense, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I sense that that's a part of that, something that you embraced as well, being a fixer. And a lot of times, and I've been guilty of that as well, being a fixer. But a lot of times when you take on the fixer role, you almost give yourself this level of pressure, this level of responsibility on you, like as if you have to stay strong for everything and everybody else. But then, one of the common sayings I've said this many times in church and in other circles, what happens when the encourager needs to be encouraged?
I actually have a workshop that I do that's called When the Encourager Needs Encouraging.
Yeah. I
That's
mean, what happens when you're the one who's always fixing stuff? When
right.
you're the one who's always the strong one in the room? What
Yeah.
happens when you're not feeling so strong? What happens
Yeah.
when you're down? Who do you
Yeah.
talk to? Who do you go to? And I believe, and this is where I think, where God steps in, as painful as it is to lose key people in your life, people who, have a great influence upon you. I think in many ways, and this is something else that I've said, about even losing my own mom. It's like, it was one of the most devastating. I wouldn't even say the most. It was the most devastating experience for me. But at the
Absolutely.
same time, it was one of the best things that could have happened to me. And
Mhm.
I only say that because a lot of times when you get reliant and dependent upon
Yeah.
somebody
Yeah.
to be that pillar of strength for you, to be
Yeah.
that go to when you can't figure it out on your own,
Mhm.
God is looking at that, and while He admires the fact that you have a loving relationship, whether it's your mom, your dad, your grandparents, or whatever, He's saying, did you forget that I'm still God over here? And
Yeah.
and and at some point, you have to understand that they did their part in pouring
Right.
into you what I wanted them to pour into you. But at some
Absolutely.
point, it's
You
kind of
gotta
like it's kind of like the bird scenario. You gotta get up out that nest and fly, or we want to go rogue with it. You got to get up, you got to do what you got to do and get up off the pot. You got to do your thing,
right.
and sometimes I think what God has to allow to happen, and it's not a bad thing for, it hurts for us in that moment, but
Absolutely.
he has to allow you to be on, in order for you, I guess, in order for you to walk in your purpose, in order for you to do what you're supposed to do, there has to
Yeah.
be a separation that takes
Yeah.
place. And
Mhm.
sometimes that separation involves you being separated from some of the people who might be the closest to you. But
Yeah.
he's standing right there saying, yeah, they're going
Love
to be
you.
all right. In
Yeah.
fact, they better off than you right now because they with
Absolutely.
me. But
Absolutely.
but even in the midst of this moment that you're going through, this pain, this grief that you're going through, I'm the ultimate comforter. I'm the
Right.
ultimate caregiver. I love you like nobody else can. So you're gonna be good. You just
Right.
got to stop trying to be your own hero. You got to stop trying to do it all yourself, and you need to lean into me and let me guide your steps. Let me comfort you. Let me guide you through this. And
Yeah.
over time, you will begin to feel that weight come up off of you. Because
Yeah.
why? Because he's taking it on for you.
Right.
He takes
Exactly.
on. He handles what you can't handle. You talked about earlier about those urges that you were getting, where you said, "I'm not trying to say that I was moving on, but I started to realize that I still had purpose here."
Yeah.
And again, that's God saying to you, "Look, I know this happened, and I know this doesn't feel good, but
Yeah.
you still got work to do. That this don't
Still,
stop what I have for you to do.
there's still
So
stuff for you to do.
it's
Absolutely.
still stuff to do." And
Yeah.
so,
And
like
like,
you said, you'll never get over
yeah.
losing your mom, your dad, your grandma. You'll never get over it, and nor should you.
Right.
But you do have to move forward.
Right.
And
Right.
this is where God can,
Yeah.
lock arms with you and walk you through that, to
Yeah.
where over time what used to be painful to you, it now puts a smile on your face, in terms of you focus, because you're now focusing on the memories and the good
Right.
times and the lessons
Exactly.
learned, not the
Exactly.
fact that, or they're no longer here anymore and I'm mad and all of
Instead
that.
instead of focusing on the loss part, right? You
Hmm.
focus on what you gained. And
Exactly.
I tell people all the time, one of the things that each one of them always did for me, they let me know I had options. I always had options, right? They let me know that I had support, and they let me know who God was.
Mm.
And so that introduction to God is what kept me right throughout all of that. Even when I was pouting, even when I was like, no, I'm not talking to you because you took my mama, right?
Hmm.
And like I said, he allowed me to pout a little bit. And then it was like, hey, I'm gonna pull your coattail. It's time for you to get back to work.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's so important. And again, even as believers, and I know, depending upon what, religious background you come up in, like I said, sometimes it's taboo to quote unquote be mad at God. God's not
Yeah.
upset that you mad, or because
I
that's just
tell
the human part of you. He expects you to
right.
feel some kind of way.
You have
He's
to
not.
have right. He
Yeah.
gave us feelings,
Yeah.
and he's big enough and he's God enough that he's
Yeah.
okay.
I'm
Yeah.
okay with that. I'm not offended. I'm not going to go in my corner and pout because you pouting
Pout.
at me. I'm gonna let you have your moment, but I'm not gonna let you sit there. I'm
Right.
gonna remind you, okay, you
Yeah.
know,
You
see,
gotta
it's
get
because he's the only one that it's okay to tell us how long we have to do our
Mm-hmm.
stuff. It's
Mm-hmm.
problematic when man or when woman try to tell you, oh, Christy, it's been X number of years. You need to get over that. That ain't for you
Mm-mm.
to tell me that. That's not
Right.
that's
And
not your place.
he does it with so much love, right? So he
Mm-hmm.
didn't, it was a gentle nudging,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was a desire, it was a fire that was lit, right? That had been there, and I had kind of covered it up a little bit, right, with all this grief and all of these other things. And he just relit the fire. And he was
Mm-hmm.
like, you remember, you like helping folks.
Yeah.
Remember, like, you have a gift. You know you have a gift. All right,
Mm-hmm.
remember there's work to do. Remember, you have a plan. You're going to school. You didn't just come up with that plan. Right? God gave me that plan a long time ago.
Right. And when you
And
think even go, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, and then he made sure that it came to fruition as
Mm-hmm.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just gonna say real quick, just when you just think about the field of work that you're doing, I
Yeah.
want to be a psychologist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you're talking about discussing with people what's going on in their head, what's going on with
Yeah.
their emotions, and all that. Well, part of that criteria, yeah, there is an academic part of it that you got to
Mm-hmm.
go through. You got to get your certifications and all of that. But there's also some experiences that you got to go through. I mean, when you're called to do a work, when God
Yeah.
has truly called you to do a work, part of what we sign up for, and this is the part we don't usually like to, marinate on, but the reality is part of what you sign up for is you got to go through some stuff. And
Yeah.
going through some of that stuff is going to involve some things that hurt. But the
Yeah.
reason why you go through it and be able to not only experience it, but to be able to withstand it through the help of God leading you through, it now equips you to be able to pour into somebody who's going to one day be sitting in that chair or laying down on that couch next to you
Mm-hmm.
saying, Christy, this is what I got going on. And you're going to be able to relate to that. And it's going to be evident in the words and in the delivery, because you talked about that nudge that God gives you where he just had a way of saying it.
Yeah.
That makes all the difference in the world. But you wouldn't be able to speak to people. You wouldn't be able to relate to them in the same way if you didn't have some
If I had
experiences to
not,
draw from,
absolutely.
some pains
Ab-
that you felt, some hurts.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. Being able to help folks that are grieving now,
mhm.
right, looks different now that I've been through my own grieving process.
Yeah. Yeah. So that way you're not coming off like you just reciting some textbook terms that you study for on one of your, or one of your papers that you had to write or anything like that. You're speaking from a place of experience, a place not only from experience, but also your connection to God
Yeah.
allows you to prophetically speak in a way that's just going to be different than just somebody who just went through the motions of taking some classes and got their certification. Because even in those levels, it's different. The
Yeah.
psychologist who's not is not in relationship with God versus a psychologist who is in relationship with God makes
Yeah.
all the difference
Yeah.
in the world. So those things all of those things had to happen for a reason. I mean, we all know that each of us has an expiration date,
Yeah.
but it's bigger than just my loved one is no longer here. There's something that they poured into me. There's something there's, again, it goes back to there's still work for me to do. And
Real work.
they've
Yeah.
imparted, my ability to do some of
Yeah.
that work. It's because of them that's helped me to be in this position to be able to respond accordingly. So,
Yeah.
very, very, very good story that you shared there. And I appreciate, again, your transparency in doing so. Um, so Christy, when you do face challenging moments, obviously you talked about some major stuff, obviously with passing of loved ones, but storms are not always going to be big like that. Sometimes it's just regular day-to-day life and type stuff, that we deal with. But nevertheless, whenever you find yourself facing adversity, challenging times, or what have you, I'm curious to know, what is your procedure, your process, your
Yeah.
your regimen, if you will, that you like to go through that just kind of works best for you whenever you find yourself facing adversity before you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, being a psychologist, right? Like, I'm working with people on stress relief and being able to be aware of what their triggers are and all of those things all the time. So, one, I have to be aware of what's going on for me, right? And how is it showing up? So, stress for me usually comes up with like lack of sleep. If I'm not sleeping well, something's going on. Right.
Mm,
So I think sometimes we move around so much and we're going that we'll be stressed and we don't even realize it. We don't even recognize that we're stressed. But lack of sleep and lack of appetite for me usually signals like, hey, something's going on. So when I notice that, I want need to take a pause and just like do an inventory.
Mm.
Like, what is it that's triggering me? Is it too much work? Is it too many activities outside of work? Is it just that life been lifing? Right? Like, am I supporting a lot of people and they have a lot going on? Right? Like, what is it that's happening with me? And then that tells me where I need to go. Now, my faith is gonna always come up. So we're
Mm-hmm.
gonna always pray about it. We're gonna always get in the word. I'm always ask God, show me which way I need to go with this. Right. Is this a time where I need to kind of disconnect from a few things and need to just take some time to myself? Or is this a time where I need to actually lean into my support group? Right. So I call it my tribe or my circle. I have a great support circle, great friends, a loving husband, still the family that's left, right? Great family members. And so is this a time where I need to lean in and I need to ask for help? I need to delegate some things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let go of some things and let some other people do them? Or is this a time where maybe I just need some peace and quiet?
Mm.
And depending on what the issue is, right, God will let me know which way I need to go.
Love that. Love that. First and foremost, identifying that God is the head of it.
Yeah.
That having that relationship with Him makes all the difference in the world. Because again, even in your expert, line of work, you
Hmm.
still need somebody that in those trying times that's bigger than you, that's better,
Yeah.
that's stronger than you, that's more knowledgeable than you, that can kind of put it in perspective in just the right way that you need to see and hear it, so you'll know what to do. And I love that you didn't make it be about, just giving me a one track, one lane type of answer. Sometimes God's direction to you might just be, as you said, it might just, you need some quiet time. You need some peace. Sometimes it just might be, you need to take better care of yourself, get more
Yeah.
rest, or, adjust your diet. Sometimes it might just be, hey, lean into that circle. They'll tell
Yeah.
you they'll give you the support you need. Sometimes it may be, I need to let go of some things because I'm overbooking myself.
Yeah.
I'm stretching myself too thin. That's what
Yeah.
encouragers are. As great as encouragers are, we're notoriously
Yeah.
bad about spreading
Yeah.
ourselves too thin.
Yes, we
And
will.
and and, and as we've always heard, old saying, been around forever. You can't pour from an empty cup. You
Yeah.
know,
Mhm.
So if I'm facing adversity and I'm already on E, then how
Right.
am I going to
And what am
properly process that?
Right. And I love, so I'm doing a lot with self care and talking about self care mindset versus self care activities,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like the things we do that are considered self care, that's great. But how do we think about self care? How do we
Mm-hmm.
approach self care? And so that whole, like, you can't pour from an empty cup, that's absolutely true. I'm trying to move even more down that line of I should be pouring from my saucer at this point,
Mm,
right? So my cup needs to stay full. So I have to do certain things to keep my cup full. Everything else should be overflow.
mm,
Right?
mm.
And I think that's a shift in mindset that I've been working on these last couple of years.
I love that. Love that. Matter of fact, a guest I just had did a session with just recently. She talked about, we were talking about self care, and she just talked about the importance about keeping her roots watered. I gotta keep my roots
Yeah.
watered so I can stay strong and firm.
Yep.
If I'm not watered properly, then
Ooh,
I'm not going. And I was like, oh, okay, I hadn't
that's
heard
the
that
point.
before. So I
Yeah.
like that. I like that. But definitely what you said about the self care, because I have my own self care formula in
Mhm.
mind, and that process that I've come up with is, like you stated, it's more geared toward the mental. Because a
Yep.
lot of times when we think about self care, we kind of go and nothing is wrong with the other part of
Right.
self care, like,
Nothing wrong with that.
get massages, get
Yep.
pedicure, manicures, go on vacation, take yourself on a trip, this or that. Those are all important, but I think there's layers to the self care, where there's that mental layer, there's that emotional layer, that's that spiritual layer that you got to tap into as well, in conjunction with some of the quote unquote activities that you spoke of. Nothing wrong
Mhm.
with those activities, but don't
Right.
don't get yourself pigeonholed into just thinking that you're going to be able to address all the challenges of life because you get a massage every week.
Exactly. Exactly. Or it's like, well, now I've checked it off, right? Well, I did my self care. I checked it off. Mm-mm, mm-mm. It's
Mm-mm.
how we approach it. It's how we're looking at it. It's our mindset about it. That's the real thing that's gonna help us.
Absolutely. And when you speak about it from a mindset perspective, then that means I'm not waiting for something
There you
wrong to happen.
uh-huh.
This is something that I
Doing
do
it all the time.
all the
Yeah,
time.
all
So
the time.
it doesn't matter when that storm is, even though I don't have any idea when that storm is going to hit, even though I don't have any idea how strong that storm is going to come at me, it doesn't even matter. I don't even have to worry about it because there's a regiment that I go through
I
that is
have
tapping into
reserve.
my mental, my emotional, my spiritual. So I'm ready regardless
Yeah, I have
when it
reserve.
hits.
Yeah. I tell my patients often, if you keep a reserve, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your personal resources, if you keep a reserve, when you get hit, it doesn't feel the same. Right? You don't get
Mm-hmm.
knocked down the same way because you got a reserve. You got
Yeah.
something already there to help build you up. But that means we have to do these things on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I got to delegate on a regular basis. I got to set boundaries on a regular basis. I got to learn how to say no
Mm-hmm.
on a regular basis, right? And not feel guilty about it. And
Mm-hmm.
still, do all of those activities because those things are great, but we have to learn how to prioritize us. We have to spend time with God. All of that stuff has to be on a regular basis.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I totally get that, and it's so important. And again, and I speak to this, and I appreciate even as you're speaking to this. We're not even saying that we're all there just yet, but we understand
This is a
the
journey.
steps that have to be. It's a journey. It's a
It's a,
journey to get to what we're talking about. So I want our listeners to understand we're by no means trying to sit here and act like we got it all perfect and figured out. We don't. A lot of what you spoke to that need to be dealt with, the reserves, the prioritizing. I am a I am a work in progress. Trust and believe. I
all of
might
us.
I might play it off real good to many, but trust and believe I am a work in progress. But it's definitely a goal worth pursuing because ultimately, when that becomes your normal, your lifestyle, your way of being, it makes
Yeah,
all the difference in the world. So much in every facet of your life, every
yeah,
facet of it. And so
absolutely.
that's definitely what I'm shooting for. And I know that's definitely what you're shooting for. And that's what you're trying to teach other people that when you go out to speak and do workshops and things of that nature. So again,
Yeah.
that's just God using those gifts, working through you, working through your personal experiences at the same time. He's
Mhm.
cleaning it up and fixing it all simultaneously. It's all
Yes. Yes.
I'm getting Christy in order and I'm letting Christy get other people in order at the same time.
Absolutely. And that, that's it's so amazing that you said that because that's part of kind of my spiel for people, right? When we talk about like freedom and talk about how do we, walk out our purpose and how do we make an impact, God can get you together while having you make an impact.
Hmm.
You don't have to wait, right? Like you don't have to say,
Right.
well, wait, let God fix me, right? Like
Hmm.
folks used to say about church, let me get
Hmm.
myself,
Let me
then
get
I'm gonna
myself
go.
cleaned up before I go ahead and
No,
before
no,
I go to the spiritual hospital. Let me medicate
right.
myself
Let
first.
me medicate first, right? And let me get well first, and then I'm
Right.
gonna go. No, that's not how that works, right? And so, like you just said, God will clean you up while allowing you to be a part of somebody else's cleanup.
Mhm.
All of that can happen at the same time
Absolutely.
because
Absolutely.
He's
Love
amazing.
that.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Ooh, okay. Okay. So, Christy, if you had an opportunity, when you reflect back on all your life experiences, things that you've had to face and overcome, challenges that you had to work through, and maybe are still working through, if you had a chance to speak to the younger Christy, as you reflect back on those times, or just think that there may be somebody listening to this broadcast right now, and they're going through some of the things that you spoke of, dealing with grief, dealing with setting the boundaries, dealing with how to prioritize self and
Yeah.
all of the things that we spoke of. They're struggling with that right now.
Yeah.
What would be your words of encouragement, your words of inspiration to them and to that younger Christy? If she's sitting across from her, what would you tell her that you think would be essential, critical to apply right now that can be implemented to turn a different leaf, or turn over a different leaf, if you will, have a different focus, a different perspective on how to handle those moments and just adversity and challenges in general?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So first and foremost, be yourself. Be whoever it is God has created you to be. Don't waste your time trying to appease other folks. Don't waste your time trying to give energy to situations and to relationships and to things that God didn't even want for you. Right? You trying to make it be something that is not.
Hmm.
Right. And I'm thinking about younger Christy now, right? Make sure that you are showing up as you because you are needed. just who you are, just who God created you to be. You're needed. And yes, you're going to go through some things. So you definitely want to keep your relationship with God intact. Make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do there. Excuse me. And you also want to make sure that you are putting energy into relationships and into people and into areas that are going to serve you, right? Things that are healthy for you, because everything's not healthy for us.
Mm.
Excuse me. Oh, I get a little parched. But yeah, so be yourself. Focus on things that are healthy and are good for you. And stop trying to please everybody else.
Mm. That's so important, so critical. I've been guilty of that. Trying to, like you said, trying to people please, trying to do what other people think you should do, instead of, like you said, following your heart, following what God is telling you to do.
Right.
Like you said, trying to force things. God ain't even told you to do that. And you're trying to force it and trying to make it work, whether it's relationships, whether it's job situations, whether it's
Right.
whatever. You trying to force something. We gotta
Right.
we gotta get beyond that, and
Because
and
we
just
think
like you.
we can
I'm sorry.
see,
Go ahead.
right? We think we can see what it is that we're supposed to be doing. Like, oh, well, I know what it is I'm supposed to be doing. Let me take this shortcut
Mhm.
and get there this way, right?
Yeah.
Well, I know God wants me to be married, right? So let me make sure this relationship works. When God said that, I didn't tell you that. Right? I might have told you about marriage and I will get there or get you there when it's time for you to be there, but not on your timeline, on my timeline.
Hmm.
Right? So you putting a whole bunch of effort into something that I ain't even told you you were supposed to have.
That part. That part. Yeah.
So we cause ourselves a lot of like anguish and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stress because we're, like you said earlier, not allowing God to be the person that's walking it out with us. Right? We trying to take it on. We gonna be our own hero. Turn it over to God. Trust His timeline and be you. Right? And trust that who you are is exactly who He wanted you to be.
Mm.
All right. So if He wanted you to sound like somebody else, if He wanted you to look like somebody else, He would have done that. Right? He made you who He wanted you to be. Walk boldly and proudly in that.
Love that. Love that. So that's so valuable. So valuable to embrace, to take in, because again, we're, especially in today's times, with the influences of, social media and internet and all the stuff, things that we didn't even have access to this
Right.
stuff when
We
we
didn't
were
have a
coming up,
yeah.
and now it's just so impressionable, and people are just taking it in so many different wild and crazy directions, and you're looking at it and you're like, God ain't told you to do that. He did not tell you to do that. And people are just doing it so casually and justifying it like it's just okay it's almost like we're trying to undo, the works of God, and we know everything that He does and everything that He's created is perfect, and
Right.
we need to embrace it for what it is. And
Yeah.
we're imperfect in our own human conditions, but we can be perfected in our
Right.
relationship with God.
Right.
He can shape and mold and smooth out those rough edges to us, but we have to be leaning into the right source, and He is that right source. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think a lot of times people lean to their own understanding, right? And because we have finite understanding, right? We can only see what's right in front of us when He has this top down perspective
Mm.
and He has right like now and future and past, right? Like he can look at all of that at the same time because He's the creator of time, right? We can't see what He can see. And so if we just go off of what we know, we gonna mess it up every time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I said, leaning into our own, and it doesn't mean that we don't, that God didn't place intelligence, that He
You're
didn't place
right.
sound
Absolutely.
reasoning or logic, and He
Absolutely.
placed that in us too. But
Yeah.
in embedded in that is still, running that by Him.
Yeah.
We may come up with something and say, "How's this, God? Am I on the right track with this,
Right.
or am I
Right.
missing something? Do I need to go dig a little deeper on this, or do I need to add something, or do I need to take something out of this?"
And
Like, He
when we're
created us, so
when
go
we're
ahead.
connected, we know, we will. He'll tell us whether or not this came from Him or
Mm-hmm.
whether we came up with it all on our own. right? And that's what I think it took me a while to understand. The desires that I have, he gave them to me. Right. So, like the desire to help people in the way that I'm helping people. He knew what gifts he gave me. Right. So, he gave me the desire to do it in the way that I'm doing it. Right. Because all of this falls in line with his plan. And I think sometimes, we don't ask, we don't check in like, wait, is this me or is this what he gave me?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like, was this already put here? Was this already something that I'm supposed to be pulling from? Or did I get this from social media? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yes, I think when we stay connected and we're listening, because he's always talking. So
Mm-hmm.
when we stop and listen, then we'll get the answer to some of those things, and we'll be able to say, "Oh no, that was just me. That was just Christy. That wasn't him."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah. And
mm.
and that's when you know that's when you know that not only are you in that relationship with him, but that you're growing in it. When it
Yeah.
starts to get to a point where you do something, or you say something, or you put yourself in a particular situation or circumstance, and you're not so quick to automatically say, the devil made me do it. Now, don't get me wrong. He's out there and he's
Right.
he's he's tempting you. He's trying to set you up and put you in, in compromising situations. But I'm finding that the more I'm in relationship with God and the older I get,
Mhm.
I have to be, if I'm being straight up and honest, there are times when I do or say something, and when I reflect back on it, I'll be like, that was all on you. You knew you wasn't supposed to do that. You knew you wasn't supposed to say that. Don't even part your lips to say the enemy didn't. No, that was all you. You actually helped him. He didn't even have to put no work in on this one. You did that all by yourself. You was
All by
faced with this situation. You already knew what God said
uh,
about it.
uh
You had a choice to make, and you chose what you wanted to do, knowing you
Right.
knew what was going to happen out of this. And then it happened, and then you go, why I do that? Because
Right.
you wanted to, because you doing your own thing, you relying on your own, you,
That's
you
how he function.
you bumping your own head on
Yeah.
purpose. You just walking up to the wall and just bumping your head on purpose. Why are you doing that? You can't even call that a slip up on. You did that.
Right.
So yeah, but again, that all comes into that relationship with God, and like you said, He's always talking, but sometimes we talk a little bit too much, or we ignore what He's
Yeah.
saying,
Yeah.
and we have to sometimes that be still moment.
Yeah.
Okay, let me hear what He has to say. Let me and not be clock watching in the meantime, because like you said, some things are going to happen right away, but then there are going to be other things that it's going to take some
It,
time with this.
it takes some time, and it's because he knows when we can handle what.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
I think if we can just like understand that all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord and are called according to his purpose, right? He knows when we are ready for certain things. He knows what situation is going to be better to then give us certain things. And yes, we want them. We understand that. But it's just like when you were a kid and you wanted certain things and your parents said, not yet, right? They
Mm-hmm.
had knowledge of different things that we didn't have knowledge of at the time. And so all we knew was we weren't getting what we wanted. But they knew now,
Right.
well, I'm doing it this way for this reason. I'm gonna give it to them on this day, or give it, if it's candy or whatever, I'm gonna do it earlier in the day because later in the day they won't be able to sleep, right? Like everything was for our good. It just didn't always seem that way. But as we get older and, like you said, grow in the Lord, we have to be able to realize some of that.
Absolutely. Wow. Wow. Good stuff. Good stuff. Christy, this has been a wonderful conversation having with you. I've thoroughly enjoyed hearing your story, hearing your journey. You definitely dropped some gems on us. I know I've been blessed. I know my audience has been blessed in listening to you. So I'm so thankful that we made this opportunity happen and that you've
Me
been a
too.
part of this experience with me. But before I let you go, as is customary here at the Blessings in the Streets podcast, we want to take an opportunity to love on you, to celebrate you, to acknowledge you. If you got any exciting news to share, personally, professionally, or both, that's going on right now or coming up down the pipe, if you would, please share that. So we can show you some love and acknowledge and find out ways to connect with you, in whatever way possible. So go ahead. What you got for us? What's coming up down the pipe for Christy?
Yes. So, y'all, I have a lot of things going on, right? So, when we talk about being an encourager, right, like you said, we pour out quite a bit. Pouring out when I'm doing it the way I'm supposed to do it energizes me, right?
Mm.
And so, a few ways that I am pouring out right now through Heart and Soul Mental Health LLC, which is my organization. I have a workshop coming up in June. It'll actually be Wednesday, June 19th. I am doing a free workshop about authenticity and freedom and how do we get to a different level of freedom. All right. And so I have an acronym that I created called MAGIC. That's your mannerisms, your attitude, your genuineness, your identity, and your core values. And so, how do we lean more into our magic? How do we walk boldly in our magic so that we can freely and boldly carry out the purpose that God has given us? So, that's one thing that's coming up, our workshop. And one reason that I'm doing the workshop in June is because I'm having my third annual women's conference in July here in the Baltimore area. And so, it's called Free Before 40. And so Free Before 40 is a women's conference that's open to women of all ages. But the backstory behind the name Free Before 40 is this idea that we do not have to wait until we are established. We don't have to wait until we're married. We don't have to wait until we have a certain job or a certain level of education. We can walk out our journey, our purpose right now, right where we are. God has already given us everything that we need. And so the more that we connect, the more that we learn, the more that we engage with other women and connect with God, then we can be free right where we are. So we don't have to wait until 40. We can be free before 40. We can also be free at 50. Okay.
Mm.
And every other age. So if any woman that's listening to this is in the Baltimore or the DMV area and you want to join us on Saturday, July 19th or July 20th, Saturday, July 20th, please, I'll give you the website so you can sign up. I also have virtual options because a lot of my support system is all around the country. And so everybody can't be with me in Baltimore, but there is a virtual option as well.
Awesome. Awesome. So for people who so people want to connect with you, keep up with activities that you got coming up or anything like that, what is the best way for them to do so?
Best way is to find my website. It is www.heart, the letter N, soul, the letter M, the letter H.com. So that's www.heartnsoulmh.com.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, again, Christi, thank you so much for being on the show, sharing as you've shared so transparently, so authentically, dropping the gems, just pouring of yourself into others. It's just as you do every day. But I'm just appreciative that you have done it on my platform and for my listeners and for myself. It is definitely greatly appreciated. And for my audience, if you've enjoyed the content that you've been listening to today, what we're doing and how we're doing it, please subscribe, please share, please like, please comment, because here at the Blessings in the Streets podcast, this is what it's all about. We want to encourage, we want to empower, we want to uplift, we want to inspire, keeping it real, being raw, being transparent, being open in the best way that we know how, with the hopes of helping you be able to deal with your respective challenges and adversities and encounters in life. But at the forefront of our conversation, just making sure that you understand that it all begins with that relationship with God. When you lean into Him, when you trust in Him, when you connect with Him, nothing is impossible for you to overcome. Nothing is impossible for you to withstand, to endure, to encounter, because He's the ultimate problem solver. He loves us unconditionally. He wants nothing but the best for us. So if you don't currently have a relationship with God, today is a mighty fine day for you to make that decision. And I can tell you, and I know Christi can tell you, it'll be the best decision that you've ever made in your life. So with that said, again, thank you for tuning in. And remember, here at the Blessings in the Streets podcast, this is the place where your story is your glory, where your relationships are relevant, and your journey is your joy. I am your host, Joseph B. Roberts. Thank you so much for tuning in. And again, you keep pushing forward. You keep pressing through. You keep fighting that fight the good fight. You're still human. It's okay to be frustrated. It's okay to have your moment, especially when challenging times and adversity comes your way, but just don't stay stuck there. Lean into God, allow Him to be your comforter, allow Him to be your protector, allow Him to be your guide, your eyes and ears to navigate you through that storm. And and trust and believe that He'll not only get you through it, but you'll come up out of that thing standing upright, stronger, better, and wiser than what you were even before the storm began. And he can set you up in such a way that you can not only receive blessings for you, but you can be a blessing for other people. So until next time, you take care of yourselves. I look forward to seeing you again at our next broadcast. Have a great rest of your evening.